right, here we go on a Monday. Another beautiful morning up north here from Lake Wissota. I'm Pat Kreitlow. Nice to have you along. And we've got a great guest to visit with today. Lieutenant Governor Sara Rodriguez is going to be joining us in just a sec, standing by. For folks who haven't caught this before since the radio show ended, still doing interviews for Up North News, stories for Up North News, and a lot of those stories and interviews are done behind the scenes. But heck, when we get a chance to talk with somebody live, why not share it with an internet audience? And that's why we are very honored to have the Lieutenant Governor here. Of course, if you want to see the work that I'm doing over at Up North News, you can head over to the website, upnorthnewswi.com, and you can sign up for the newsletters there as well, including our Sunday morning politics-based newsletter with a question of the week that has already picked up a lot of responses. I ask about the right path forward when Trump is no longer in power. How should this country go about getting back on track in terms of, criminal prosecutions versus letting things go? I give you a few different options, and I'll read you some of the responses. You're already seeing a crawl on the screen because instead of our usual do something calendar of events, there are going to be all kinds of walkouts tomorrow, something called the Free America Walkout at 2 o'clock local time all over the country. And so along the bottom of the screen, those are some of the places and venues where people will be walking out at 2 o'clock or wherever, if it says something different on the screen, and gathering someplace to mark 1 year of Donald Trump in office. Yep, just 1 year, 3 to go. So again, there may be people motivated to show up there at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Then we'll have today's history lesson. Pete Buttigieg is part of it, along with some TV history. So it's nice to have all of you here today. Let's start with the governor's field, and there will be, of course, a forum coming up this Wednesday with the candidates for governor that Main Street Alliance, Main Street Action is putting on, and one of those candidates is the current lieutenant governor of the state of Wisconsin, Sara Rodriguez, and she's joining us now live to talk a bit about the race, the fundraising, a recent proposal she made dealing with ICE immigration enforcement in Wisconsin, and more. Lieutenant Governor Sara Rodriguez, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so nice to see you again. We appreciated getting an early update on the campaign when you first got involved. More recently, you have put forward your own thoughts and proposals for how Wisconsin should be handling whatever it is we want to call what President Trump is doing with ICE and an alleged crackdown on immigration. Again, I think there's other ways to describe it, but in any essence, ICE is operating in cities around the country, and you have thoughts that if you were governor, you'd like to see implemented here in the state. Tell folks more about what you're proposing.
Yeah, so I put this proposal out because, immigration is central to my family, and I imagine it's central to many families across Wisconsin. My husband is a naturalized citizen from Mexico, and we speak Spanish in our house. And it was really disturbing to me to see what the federal agents were doing all across the country, sort of indiscriminately picking people up based on their skin color or the fact that they spoke Spanish. And when I saw what was happening in Minneapolis, I felt strongly that I wanted to make a statement that I stand with our immigrant community and that there are things that we can do to keep Wisconsinites safe. So what I'm looking for is nothing more than we ask our current law enforcement here in Wisconsin. So we want them to have warrants. We want them to have judicial warrants before they indiscriminately go in and looking for people. They need to have somebody who they are specifically looking for with a name and an identification that they can talk about. We don't want them going into sensitive places without that judicial warrant. And let's talk about, schools. We've seen what happened in Minneapolis with schools, churches, hospital systems, into courthouses. People should be able to access these sensitive places without fear of being indiscriminately picked up by federal agents. I've also called for them to be unmasked and to wear body cameras. We've seen that there have been multiple instances where community members have been recording them and they've seen abuses. They should have body cameras themselves. We know that it makes law enforcement safer, local law enforcement safer when they have body cameras. And it's going to make sure that we keep Wisconsinites safe here in Wisconsin.
You note a couple of other venues that would be included, such as places of worship and domestic
Yep,
violence shelters, which seem to
correct.
make common sense. But there also would be exceptions that you put in here as well, a judicial warrant being one of them.
Correct. As well as any imminent harm. If there's an imminent harm going on, absolutely. This is something that they've always been able to do. And we know that we just need to have clear guidelines in Wisconsin. Other states are moving quickly to make sure they can protect Wisconsin, their own community members. Let's do this proactively before ICE has a large presence in Wisconsin. And we know that they will eventually. That was my concern, is that President Trump escalates, and he always escalates. And if we do nothing, that does not mean that he is not going to escalate more. He will. This is what he does. So there is no purpose in us not trying to protect our community members with the hope that he won't escalate here in Wisconsin. He will.
You've really hit the nail on the head in terms of the great debate going on right now as to the degree to which people should resist and stand up to what is happening, as opposed to those who think, well, that's giving Trump what he wants. That will exacerbate the situation. Governor Evers expressed a line of thinking along those lines, that this might just ramp up some of the tensions involved. But again, I feel like you're in the camp that says we can't simply be completely passive to what this president is doing with his own basically private militia.
Correct. We cannot and I absolutely understand where Governor Evers is coming from, and I have immense respect for him. But I do disagree with him on this. I think we should be proactive in protecting our community members. We should be proactive in making sure that there are clear guidelines for federal agents within the state of Wisconsin. Other states are doing it. Let's make sure that we have those in place before they come into the state.
We're talking to Lieutenant Governor Sara Rodriguez and about how the ICE enforcement situation is unfolding in the Twin Cities and how things could happen here in Wisconsin. The leading Republican candidate for governor, Congressman Tom Tiffany, was interviewed over the weekend, and one of the quotes I saw there is, "For the life of me," he says, "I don't understand where the lieutenant governor is coming from." And he went on to explain, I guess, to be charitable, trying to have it both ways in terms of whether there would be impact in terms of our farm workers, our migrant workers there, whether there are or are not violent criminals among them. You don't have to respond to everything that Tom Tiffany tried to say about this, but when he does say, "I don't know where the lieutenant governor is coming from," how would you respond to that for folks that might hear that and agree?
I think he should be talking to his community members, because when I talk to my community members, they agree with me. They see the excesses and the abuses that the federal agents are doing in Minneapolis. They don't want that coming to Wisconsin. And believe me, I live in a red community. I live in Waukesha County. I have neighbors, friends who often vote in a conservative way. They've spoken to me about how concerned they are with what's been happening within Minneapolis and Minnesota. And they don't want that type of thing to come here to Wisconsin to endanger their neighbors' lives. They realize that we have an absolute right to protest peacefully, that we have the absolute right to record these federal agents. And that is something that I would really argue against. What Congressman Tiffany is talking about is, if he was talking to his community members, he would be able to see that the vast majority of Wisconsinites and the vast majority of U.S. folks want these types of restrictions in place.
Late last week came the deadline for the fundraising that was done by candidates for governor for the second half of 2025, and you had a very respectable number. There are all kinds of ways to parse the numbers. I don't like to focus too much on them, but since we did just have the deadline, I'd like to have your own thoughts. You didn't raise the most money. You weren't least in there by any stretch. Everybody had different either organizations, PACs, or blocks of donors that benefited them one way or another. How would you interpret your own initial round of fundraising?
So this is exactly what we expected to be able to be at this point in the campaign. What I'm really proud of is that we have had donations from every single county in the state of Wisconsin. And the vast majority of our funds are coming from the state of Wisconsin. So we know that there's excitement and grassroots support for what we're doing. And I couldn't have been prouder of what our campaign has done. And this is exactly where we needed to be right now.
Lieutenant Governor Sara Rodriguez is with us. And now this week there will be the first, I think, official, if you will, candidate forum with the 7 leading Democratic candidates that Main Street Alliance, Main Street Action is putting on. I had a chance to talk to former Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes when he was up here about a week ago. And so I want to ask you as well, the feeling of finally be able to get in a room and kind of, mix it up with the other candidates. Everybody's had the round of introductions, the announcements, the fundraising. Now people get to do the compare and contrast. What are your thoughts about heading into this first forum?
Yeah, I'm excited to be able to do this. I think it's healthy for us to be able to show that there are differences between the candidates. And I think what people should be looking for are very specific policy ideas, but also who's going to be the one that's going to be able to take on Tom Tiffany in November? Who's going to be the one to be able to create across the finish line? Who has the best electability and who has the experience to be able to hit the ground running day one once they win in November? And for myself, I'm one of the only candidates that has private industry executive experience as well as held elected office. I think that's a good balance when you're talking about being able to manage something as large as the state government, but also have the relationships with elected officials to get your agenda across the table.
Speaking of getting an agenda across the table, as we know, the governor last week again put out a plea to the legislature to work on property tax relief, given that the likely budget surplus is currently coming in higher than originally forecast. There are only a few work days left in this particular session of the legislature. I am sure that as a nurse, you have some thoughts on what the legislature ought to be doing on health care, but for whatever work can be done yet, what would you like to see happen before everybody basically goes home to campaign?
So hope springs eternal that they'll be able to do something before the end. But if history is any predictor, my guess is the Republican-led legislature is not going to be putting very many things that are going to help Wisconsinites this session. What we're seeing is huge premium increases on from the Affordable Care Act on the exchange. That's going to be very, very devastating for small business owners actually in the state. Many of them get their health insurance on the exchange. Other states have tried to fill in that breach for a bit to make sure that they can lower premiums for folks on the exchange. That's something they could do with the surplus. I agree that property tax relief is something that we need to be looking at. I saw my property tax bill coming up, and it was way higher than I thought it was going to be. And we're, depending on what you look at, we're top 10 in the country for property taxes. And there's a reason for that, which is that the Republican-led legislature has not funded our cities and counties appropriately. So they have to increase property taxes for basic services, roads, pools, parks, all of these types of government services that we know people want to be able to live with, and they haven't funded the schools properly. So this is something that we have to make sure that we're doing to lower the costs for Wisconsinite.
Sara Rodriguez is Lieutenant Governor and a candidate for governor, and you can get that information on her campaign website, saraforwi.com. That's SARAFORWI.com. Lieutenant Governor Rodriguez, so nice to see you again. Safe travels. Thanks for spending some time here today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You bet. Nice to see you again. All right. Still ahead, we're going to have today's history lesson and a bit of a calendar of events with a whole lot of events taking place tomorrow as people get set to take part in the Free America Walkout. I'll start that little ticker again. Some of the many places around the state where that's going to be happening. We'll have that and our history lesson in just a bit. All right, birthdays today. Dolly Parton is 80 years old today. Pete Buttigieg is 44. Just had that town hall in La Crosse on Friday. Since Derek Van Orden doesn't seem to want to do any in his congressional district. There are a few, there's some celestial birthdays we have to mark today. Phil Everly of the Everly Brothers was born 87 years ago today. He passed away in 2014. Janis Joplin. This would have been her 83rd birthday, but of course she passed away way back in 1970. And singer Robert Palmer was born 77 years ago. He passed away in 2003. In the history books, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, was founded on this day in 1920, so it's now 126 years old. And almost 72% of TVs in the United States on this day in 1953, almost 75%, were tuned into I Love Lucy to watch the episode where Lucy gives birth. And so I've put a link to that through YouTube in the comment sections, as well as a link to the number one song this day in 1974, 52 years ago. One of my favorite songs still is Al Wilson's Show and Tell. And on this day in 1966, Simon and Garfunkel released Homeward Bound. Well, there's our history lesson, and as far as our Do Something calendar of events, well, there you see already the many events that are part of the Free America walkout that is taking place. But that's not the only thing that's going on tomorrow. There is also going to be, as we heard from Sean Feddaplace last week, Main Street Alliance and Main Street Action, a group representing small businesses and families, will be planning a day of grassroots activity around the state capitol. More than 100 small business owners and allies from across the state. They're going to talk to legislators about, again, expanding postpartum Medicaid coverage for new moms, paid family and medical leave, child care funding, small business financing, and more. Secretary of State Sara Rodriguez will be there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the very next day, on Wednesday, Main Street Action is putting together that first gubernatorial forum of the year. Our friend Dan Schaefer from the Recombobulation area will be the moderator, and Civic Media will be live streaming the forum as well. I'm going to go get details of that to share with you too. All right, let me get the answers that have come in so far to our question of the week. That is coming up next. All right, there's our question of the week. You can get it from the Sunday morning newsletter that I put together. Once Donald Trump is out of power, how does our nation begin to heal? And here are the answers that I provided. 1, prosecute Trump only, because there's going to be a lot to do when Donald Trump is out of power. And this is assuming Democrats are in charge of the White House and Congress again someday, and they will be. How do we get this country back on track? Do you focus on Trump alone? Do you just let it all go? Do you say, you know what, prosecuting Trump and the others will simply give them more media attention? We need to move on. Let's rise above it, get the country back on track. Or do you go the complete opposite way and get them all? Basically, the best way to defend our democracy is by going after every MAGA official where there is clear evidence of lawbreaking. And Lordy, there is clear evidence of lawbreaking out there. Here's a few of your answers. From Patricia, this is a hard one. She says, I would choose A, prosecute Trump only. Once he's gone, the rest will follow, like it or not. There's Maryland in Milwaukee who says, I'm leaning toward B. Trump and his cabinet seem to thrive on media attention, and prosecuting them would feed their egos. Cleaning up their messes will shine enough light on their errors. And then finally, Karen in Green Bay has an example of the responses coming in from option C, saying, I believe we will need a special committee like the January 6th committee focusing on prosecution so the cabinet and the rest of the government can focus on rebuilding and building America back better. Very well said by Karen in Green Bay. And again, so our question from our Sunday newsletter is, once Trump is out of power, how should our nation begin to heal when it comes to accountability for Trump and other people as part of this administration? If you want to see that question first and be among the early responders, then sign up for our newsletter over at upnorthnewswi.com. All right, well, that'll do it for this edition of Another Beautiful Morning Up North. We'll do at least one more this week. That'll be Wednesday with our friend Mark Jacob, who often joined the radio show on Friday mornings. He was an editor at the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times, and other places, and we'll be talking about the media coverage of recent events. And the nice thing about not having the radio show is he'll really tell us what he thinks when it comes to that. Let's see. I've also got from our friend Todd Alba. Good morning, Pat. Here's my annual reminder. If you need federal constituent services today, Congressman Glenn Grothman's office will be open and fully staffed, continuing his tradition like none other from his state Senate days. Yes, Glenn Grothman does not recognize Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and according to Todd, will be open. Can't say that I'm surprised one way in any way, shape, or form by that. All right. Well, again, so Wednesday, Mark Jacob, we may not have a program here for you on Friday. We'll just stay tuned for that. And then we'll be back next week as well with a few more of these live interviews that folks are nice enough to do for me as part of my day job over at Up North News. So have a great rest of your Monday, your holiday. Don't be looking for any mail or anything like that today. We'll see you next time for another beautiful morning up north.